Go ahead, start it. Thank you guys so much for showing up to talk about adoption support. Obligatory sponsor slide. Big thank you to all of the sponsors of DNW Drupal Summit for making this happen. And this is me. My name is Cheney. I am the Director of Client Success at Jacala. So Director of Client Success is one of those like deliberately vague titles that enables me to just do whatever I want at the company, which I love. I'm a big fan of that. Jacala, which most of you have not heard of, we used to be FFW. So FFW has been very active in the Drupal community for a very long time. It has been, I believe, still is. We still are the single most certified Drupal agency in the world. We got bought by an Italian company called Jacala a couple of years ago, but we're essentially still the same team functioning under the new name. I am not a developer. I do not know any of this stuff. My background is actually in marketing communications in higher ed, but I ended up doing a lot of very user-facing technology adjacent work in that role. I was actually an FFW client when I was working at Stanford University, which is how I came to be involved in this work. I came up to Seattle from San Francisco to work at Rick Steves Europe for a couple years until the pandemic hit. And it seemed like digital technology was maybe a safer bet for a career, and I have been with FFW and now Jacala ever since. So I tend to focus a great deal on the strategy, discovery, human side of this work. So one of the reasons I put together this talk in particular is because I feel like the industry often focuses a great deal on, naturally, the technical side, and we think of standing up a new site or upgrading a site or launching a new project. You hit launch, you monitor for bugs, and hey, your work is done. And then you have typically, especially if you're in-house, a bunch of very confused and frequently cranky users of a new site or a platform who don't know what they're doing, are frustrated, confused, and need some help to make it a success. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about both my experiences and best practices more broadly for really getting into what frankly are the big feelings of tech and how to make new platforms, upgrades, new sites more successful by providing adoption support to users going forward. So I will be lucky if we get through all three of these today. I talk a lot. I have a lot to say on this particular topic. But I'm going to do my best to speed through some of this so we have time for conversation, because I'm also very interested in some of your guys' experiences with this, good, bad, ugly, or things that have worked for you or challenges that you faced in this area that you might want to share some experiences with. So I'm going to try and zoom through a few things in particular. Of course, Ryan, I assume these slides will be available to attendees afterwards. So
recording and everything.
Yeah, fantastic, excellent. So some of the slides are a little dense and text heavy, but they'll be good for references later for anybody who needs that going forward. So we'll talk a little bit about the landscape of this challenge, go into some detail on some of the training, different types of training and adoption support modalities and which work best in which situations for which sets of users. And then we'll talk a little bit about sort of best practices for communications before, during, and after the launch of a new site or platform. So in terms of the challenge, this is something I experienced when I was working at Stanford. So I was the communications director for a research institute there. So I had about 400 some odd stakeholders, including both faculty and staff, and 80-something content editors. And the only thing they hated more than the existing site was the idea of going through the trauma of upgrading to a new site. So they love to complain about the clunkiness. So our site was Drupal 6 and then 7, and we wanted to put it on Drupal paragraphs. But we had about 38 or 40 subdomains under our sort of umbrella site. And it would have required the cooperation of the owners of all of those subdomains to move on to Drupal paragraphs to get onto a new system. So we had a lot of folks who were like, well, I hate this, but this is the devil I know. And I am not interested in getting involved with the devil I don't. This in particular is sort of like the death knell for organizational change, right? Like organizational culture is real, and it is, in my experience, more of a blocker than technical issues or even budgetary issues when it comes to trying to push change through at an organization, even if it's as simple as a site upgrade. Has anybody here ever heard the story of the sort of like a business parable of like the monkeys in the cage and like what that means about office culture? All right, I'm going to tell this one really quickly. So like you imagine like a group of monkeys in a cage and there's like a banana that hangs outside. And like every time any one of them reaches for the banana, they all get sprayed with like a blast of cold water, right? And so they very quickly learn not only should they not reach for the banana, none of their fellow monkeys should reach for the banana either. And if they try to, the other monkeys will attack and stop him from doing it, right? Swap out one monkey. That monkey, and that monkey doesn't know anything about the water. He wants to reach for the banana, and you don't even have to spray them with water. The other monkeys will stop him immediately. Swap out another monkey, same issue. The other monkeys have learned that you don't reach for the banana. Eventually you could swap out the entire set of monkeys. You never have to spray them with cold water again. And they all know not only can you not reach for the banana, you better stop anybody else who's reaching for the banana. This is the best explanation of office culture I have ever heard. And it's the same kind of issue, right? Like sometimes there are reasons for changes that no longer exist, but it's so deeply entrenched that the idea of doing things differently is unnerving, threatening, confusing for a lot of people, and they need support through a pretty big change to the way that they do their work. So this is the project I was talking about at Stanford. We added Drupal paragraphs to make the site easier to manage. Also to simply improve the visuals. The site was looking very, very outdated. I was working there during the first Trump administration, and this was a international relations research center that focused on topics like nuclear security, relations with Russia, things that suddenly became extremely relevant during those years. And we had spikes in traffic and people who were struggling to find what they were looking for. So we had interest from our leadership in investing in an overhaul of the site. But the only way that we could make this work to get our team on board for doing this project was to essentially set it up so that the new visual design was similar enough to the old one that we could roll out Drupal paragraphs and the new visual design on the umbrella site, and the subdomains could come on on their schedule as they wanted to. And so we then sort of showed off the proof of concept, and it looked very nice and very shiny. And eventually the team went from, don't come near me with your website changes, I can't deal with that, to when can I get this beautiful, pretty new site because it looks really nice. And we were like, and guess what? It's also easier to use. And then, but that process took a while. And we spent a lot of time also helping them understand how to make content changes, right? So the most controversial thing I did when we moved to the new system was I refused to create a component that offered unlimited text. And you could have heard the screaming on the other side of campus. But we spent a lot of time working with our stakeholders to help them understand how they could sort of refactor their content to fit into a more user-friendly, a web user-friendly experience. But that took a lot of time. It took a lot of persuasion, and it took a lot of time dedicated, again, to the support of our users who at least had learned the old system, as clunky and frustrating as it was. And, this is not their full-time job, right? Like, they had to learn a new system on top of everything else they're being asked to do right now. And it's challenging for them, and it's intimidating. So the most success I've had with that and any other project that I've done on this side of things is essentially listening to our users, right? So when we, as the folks who are excited to bring forward a new system, by the time that system gets to launch, we're deeply familiar with how it's going to be better than the old system. We are very excited to bring its benefits to our colleagues and to our external users. It's very, very clear to us the ways in which this is going to improve things for the organization. None of that is true for your users. At best, they've had a chance to maybe preview it and offer some inputs, hopefully. But more often than not, this is just for as many times as you communicate with them, this is a surprise that they haven't paid attention to until they are forced to. And so listening to them at each stage in the process is actually tremendously helpful in getting the buy-in that you need to ensure that your platform is a success after it's launched. There's typically three, most of your users are going to typically fall into one of three categories, right? You have light users, whose technical knowledge is going to vary, maybe pretty minimal. They have specific goals that they need to achieve as part of their job, and they just want to know how the system does that. They might not use your platform or site very often, which means they will probably frequently forget how to do the thing that they need to do on it, and so they're going to need good, consistent documentation to be able to refer to throughout. If they only touch it once a quarter to update their content, they're going to need a step-by-step list that they refer to every single time, because they're going to forget and go on about their day. Your power users won't need that type of reminder. They will get into the system, but they're going to have some opinions for you about how it works for them and doesn't work for them. They may be particularly interested in really getting into the weeds about workflow processes, about sort of like the nitty-gritty and the details. They usually fall into one of two subcategories. They are super keen to do things differently, and they will partner with you to be like the type of power user who can give you good feedback and who can tell you what they need. Or they're the kind of power user who are like, this is mine. Don't touch it. Don't touch my things. This is my thing. Stay away. And they're like, I can't possibly do what I need to do on your new system because it doesn't do it in this exact way. And that, again, is going to require some listening and conversation to get alignment between what they want to do and what you're trying to do with your platform.
And they've already figured out how to share the YouTube video by uploading it into the Word document.
Exactly, right? I feel like you need like XKCD and Strange Planet for like most of illustrations on these types of presentations, because they are doing their thing their way, and they do it all the time, and sometimes that's even harder to get people on board with doing things a little bit of a different way or using a new system. Leadership will also be involved in this, right? So typically their involvement is going to be minimal, but it is often specific to a certain thing that they particularly care about, right? So when I was at the Freeman Spogli Institute at Stanford, our faculty director was very active on Twitter, and it was a big part of the sort of raising the profile of our institute. And so for him, it was very, very important that like Twitter be integrated with the site in a variety of ways. And so like he didn't care about a lot of the other things. He didn't care how we built components. He didn't care about the things that his faculty came and complained to him about, but he cared that we had Twitter integrated. So typically leadership is going to have like a thing, and they want to make sure the site does the thing. And if it doesn't do the thing, they consider it a failure. So it can be challenging, again, to sort of align that with what you're actually trying to accomplish on behalf of the organization with your site. But when you were thinking about how to build that alignment with your users, whether it be they leadership, power users, or light users, there's usually some combination of these things going on for them when they are thinking about whether and how to be supportive of, involved in, or opposed to, this project or this upgrade that you're doing, right? They care about solving their problems and achieving their goals. They don't care about yours. So the more you can build alignment, I'm going to use alignment a lot, between what you're trying to achieve and what they're trying to achieve specifically, the more you can turn people from indifferent or against to advocates of a new system or a new platform. Trust is a big one. You'll see I have language up here about university teams because this is a talk I have given at universities frequently, but I think it applies to a lot of different kinds of organizations, which is in a lot of these settings, different departments have different priorities, different agendas. Their success is judged differently by different criteria. There may not always be a good working relationship. And so especially, if you're a part of a team that historically has not had a close working relationship with the users of that product, let's say IT and marketing, which is a very common division in higher ed and nonprofits, for example, there may be a lack of trust that you have to overcome. Dealing with major changes is hard at every company. People already have full-time jobs. Adding a new way of working can be really disruptive to folks if they have to learn how to enter content differently in a whole new CMS backend, that sort of thing. That's a headache that they don't feel like they need. And they also have issues they have to manage both up and down themselves, right? Their bosses have expectations, and however this new system or new site is going to impact how they do their work is going to impact how they look to their bosses. And they may also have staff who have opinions about changes like this and what might need to be done, and they're going to have to explain things to their staff. So they have people they're trying to keep happy as well. And so when you are talking to stakeholders who may be deeply involved in a project like this, or who may be highly influential at the organization, or may be able to sort of make or break the success of a new site or platform, think about what matters most to them, and think about how you can find that area of agreement between what you're trying to do and what they're trying to do. Because this is, again, something I've done on a few different projects, was basically go to my biggest stakeholder, the loudest voices against what I was trying to do, and say, what are you concerned about? What is bothering you about this? What do you fear will go wrong if we make this change? And then we talk about sort of mitigating those risks or concerns. Or we say, all right, like, what is the biggest thing that's bothering you about the current site right now? We make sure those solutions are included in a new build or in an upgrade. And done correctly, that can turn those voices against a project into your big advocates, and that can help with adoption across the organization. A couple of things that we are seeing increasingly as we look at like sort of issues of user support, like what are the problems or challenges that come up after a new site or platform is launched. Having a wide variety of audiences, right? You might need to tailor some of your activity or content to different types of users and audiences, from technical to non-technical, leadership to day-to-day users. More and more organizations we're seeing are wanting bigger groups of content editors to be able to go in and do their own thing, so it don't have to like bottleneck with a single like website management team. But that means, again, more different types of people from different backgrounds are interfacing with the site. And so you have an increasingly broad number of folks who need different kinds of support to get in there. We're seeing a lot of requests for like really, really targeted support and enablement. So again, this sort of corresponds to the folks who are like, I only have to use it for this thing. Teach me how to do this thing. I don't want to go through the rest of your training. I don't have time to learn about the whole thing. I only want to know how to do this thing. And again, like, that can be challenging because they often they need like a bigger foundation of information before they can do the thing. But it can be challenging to get people to that point. Definitely seeing an increase in use of knowledge bases, especially now with AI sort of coming into play on the internal side of things. So rather than like writing up extensive like written documentation, like a PDF that people need to refer to, we're seeing it like there's a greater preference for interactivity, and we'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each of these modalities in the next section. And then the other thing we're seeing a request for a lot is sort of more strategic guidance, and this again comes back to the same example I was talking about at Stanford. So like one of our challenges in disabling the ability to drop unlimited text into a site meant that our users didn't know how to put the content on there, right? They were like, I was just going to copy and paste from what my faculty member wrote. We were like, that's a bad experience for your users. Like we have bad traffic, we have high bounce rates, people see this wall of text and they don't want to read it. And they were like, well, I don't know what to do. And this was pre-ChatGPT, before you would like feed it into ChatGPT and say, make this easy to read. So we spent time helping them not just with, how do you upload images in the new backend, or how do that kind of thing, but it was like, how do you think about your content and how it should be presented? What's the point your faculty member is trying to get across here? Who is the audience? How can we present that in a different way? And it was guidance that was well beyond the typical press these buttons to accomplish this task. And we're seeing a significant increase in that because the systems and platforms are getting so much more complex now. And everyone's, got a better understanding for the most part of like, we need to talk to our audiences in the way that works for our audience, but not everybody's accustomed to doing it that way.
So would you say it's not like train the trainer, but like upskill the trainer's empathy?
It is
like content strategy.
Content strategy, yeah, basically. A lot of what we did in terms of adoption support after that particular platform launch was content strategy. It was, thinking about how you use it that way, and that was the help that they needed. They didn't necessarily need us to tell them, like, what buttons to press to accomplish X, Y, and Z task in the back end. But they needed us to say, like, my faculty member just gave me this 10-page PDF and they want me to just post it on the homepage. What do I do? So we had a lot of those conversations. So yeah, that's exactly right. It's train the trainer is still a very helpful model, but it is more thinking about like, one of the things we tell our clients a lot is like most websites, like their organizational, like the way the website is organized typically reflects the organizational structure of the institution of the business, the organization, right? It's like this stuff is in these departments and it goes this area. And that's not how users use the site, right? And so again, it's a very, like, you sort of switch your thinking, helping users understand how to switch their thinking to be like, what would my users be looking for when they come to this site? How can I make sure they find it? It's a really different way of thinking about it. So, let me make sure how we're doing for time here. When did we stop? 11? Yeah, we're good.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, so a couple of practical points about the different types of training and support modalities that we have. So there are a few different questions you might want to ask when you're thinking about the best way to provide this type of support. Taking advantage of what already exists in your organization is great. So for example, if you are a Confluence organization and you use Confluence a lot, that might be a good place to put documentation. You don't necessarily have to put it in, in some platform-specific space. Or maybe you do. Maybe building help text more extensively into the platform itself, into the back end, can be really powerful if really what people need is, what do I do with this particular component? Where does it go? What is it used for? What are the limitations on it? Having like extensive help text right there on screen can potentially be useful. So are there particular learning styles or preferences? Are there other types of trainings or other modalities that are already in use at your organization that you could take advantage of, again, to sort of make that transition a little bit easier for folks? They know where to go to get information about how to do their jobs. It could potentially go there. Do people usually prefer self-paced learning? Do they just want to get the answer to the question when they need it? Or you think users would be more comfortable if they sat down and had a tutorial? Or they had like instructor-led training or things like that. Thinking about what particular issues or challenges they face right now and how they usually troubleshoot. So is there a person that they go to? Is there a system that they go to? Like, what do they do when there's a problem? Is that system going to work for you, for this platform? Or do you need to encourage a different, process to deal with that? Thinking about what sort of initial onboarding materials or resources should be available. So not just how you're going to do ongoing, but like when you introduce the new system or platform to them, what types of resources do you think that they might need? Like, what will be most useful for them to refer to? Any particular steps or like requirements you want to have before they can start using it? So for example, if you're making a pretty significant change to a technical system or to your website, do you need to require a training before people can get in there and like mess with the back end, right? Like if you're going from Drupal 7 to 11, or you're spinning up a new site for the first time, that people haven't worked in Drupal before to edit content, do they need to go through, you need to have a little training session before you allow them to touch anything. And then feedback is critical, right? You don't only listen to them at the beginning. You keep listening throughout, because you will get good feedback from users about ways you might need to change the site. And so it also, again, it helps people feel heard, which is critical in getting good, widespread, enthusiastic support for the platform and adoption of the platform. So training and adoption support usually falls somewhere or everywhere on the spectrum, from completely self-service, like written documentation and a knowledge base, right? That's designed for people to get to when they want it and need it, all the way up to sort of fully guided, right? So that's much more hands-on, much more interactive, but it's also usually, synchronous, and requires organizational time and effort to put together. So written documentation, the knowledge base, are a little bit easier to produce and reproduce and to scale up. The training sessions and on-demand support, those can get a little bit more challenging and require a little bit more resources. We usually see, a mix of these in most sort of successful post-launch adoption support projects. So written documentation, this is where we're talking about, your how-to guides, your user manuals, your FAQs, all that kind of thing, right? Like this is sort of the classic, it's quick and easy, or at least it's the quickest and easiest of all of these, right? Because whoever has created the platform or is maintaining it can sort of write up what users need to know and just put it somewhere, and then the users can refer back to it, right? So this is really helpful for users who need to come back regularly to look at a particular step, like how do I do that? How do I stand up a new page on the site? How do I upload or edit an image, et cetera, et cetera. Thinking about learning styles is also helpful here. The like read, write, kinetic, audio, like oral, visual, or hands-on. So like for example, I learn best by reading. So I hate tutorial videos with the fire of 1,000 suns.
Yeah.
I was like, don't make me listen to somebody talk about what to do. Just let me read it. I will read it faster.
Yes.
I will comprehend better. I do better with written directions than a map. So there are people like me out there, who learn best by like reading the steps. Yeah. So written documentation is also really good for highly complex sites. So if there's a lot of work that goes into carrying out a certain task, or editing content or what have you, detailed sort of like exhaustive documentation, you can go step by step. Written is really great for that. It's great because it's accessible on demand. There's no limit on how long it can be. You can update it at any time. It is probably the fastest and easiest to produce. I had a note here that says like, consider using AI, but double check all outputs. One other interesting use of AI for this that we're looking at with a couple of clients is where exhaustive written documentation already exists, using AI to mine it for the answer to the question that your reader is looking for, right? So that type of, interactive capability on top of standard written documentation can potentially be really valuable. So we're looking into that right now with Harvard. We work with them to manage the Harvard Web Publishing platform, and so they've got hundreds, if not thousands, of like users across like a multiple set of sites. And every time somebody at any institution at Harvard that's on that platform needs to know how to do X, Y, or Z thing, well, right now they contact the Harvard Web Publishing team, which is not big enough to handle that. So they've written a bunch of documentation that nobody reads. Mm-hmm. So the next step is to be like, all right, how do we make this easier for them to get into? Disadvantages of written, of course, it's not interactive at all. It's a big block of text. Users with other learning styles may really struggle with that. I know a lot of people for whom written instruction is useless. They can't parse it in the same way. And potentially if you have like a document that you're sharing around, God help you if it needs to be updated, because now you don't know where all the original instances of it are, and then people have outdated copies of the how-to guide, and it's 5 versions ago, and you can email them all the new one, and they have not done anything about that. So that can be really challenging when you need to change stuff. The nice thing about written documentation, though, is it doesn't have to just be a wall of text, right? So you can, let's say, when we did this one, we like used annotations on the different the different components in the design system to help users understand. In this particular case, we were mapping content from an old content model to a new one. And so we were telling them, all right, like this is what the old one used to look like. Here is what the new ones are, so that when they go in to stand up a new page and they're like, wait, what's the 50/50 image card again? What's that? Like they have this piece of documentation to be like, oh, okay, the 50/50 image card looks like that. So this is written documentation, but it doesn't have to just be a wall of text. So knowledge base, there's a few different ways you can do that, right? So that can be a website, that can be Confluence, that can be Asana. That can be any type of interactive system, right, where users can go to like easily like search for information. Again, helpful for self-service and repeated references. Also good for read-write learning, and again, also good for sort of ongoing reference and frequent use. I would say probably the reason the knowledge base is a little bit easier than the written documentation, right, is it can be easier to organize and reorganize, right? If you have a written document, you're like, this piece of information, like this subject area is here, and this subject area follows it, and this subject area follows that. The knowledge base, you can kind of organize and reorganize how your information is structured. And it has a little bit sort of broader set of modalities, right? You can probably include video in there. You can include maybe like little interactive quizzes and things like that, depending on what you're using. So again, written documentation with an AI layer and knowledge base are starting to, like that Venn diagram is starting to overlap in quite a few ways. So basically it's sort of thinking of the written documentation as your source of truth, your foundation of knowledge, and then there are like a few different ways you can give your users to interact with that in the way that works best for them and makes it least likely that they will be putting in support tickets for something they should already know how to do. So the disadvantages of, sort of the knowledge base or the more interactive systems, it takes longer to produce, of course, than written documentation. You have to put a lot more thought into how it's organized. Again, it's going to require regular updates. And coming back to the same point of it needs to be organized around how the users search for information as opposed to how you've set it up. So when you the platform owner are thinking about how the information and documentation should be set up, there's going to be an organizational structure that makes a lot of sense to you. It may or may not make any sense to your users. So you may be needing to think about how to group or organize the information differently so that they can find it with greater ease. And again, an AI tool that is essentially assigned to delve into this document and no other can potentially relieve quite a few of those pressures. The only thing about creating a knowledge base that I think requires a little extra work up front is, I think, for best results we have typically seen is you want a content strategy for your knowledge base. So this is, again, when we're sort of talking about how you organize that content, it's kind of the same process that we do to create a content strategy for a website itself, right? What's the taxonomy, right? What's the sitemap looking like? Where do your users expect to find the information they're looking for? Where do they think they need to go, which might be different from where you think they need to go in order to find that. Typically, we recommend that our platform owners, our product owners, when they're at this stage of the process, think about what's the rough technical understanding of their audience, how much explaining do you need to do, what are the different ways they interact with the system, what are the things that they need to do, to get some feedback on the key topics of interest among their users. What are users most interested in learning about, or what do they need in their day-to-day? What types of information will be most helpful, particularly when it comes to self-service, right? They're I just need to be able to see the steps to do this thing every once in a while, and I don't want to have to remember it or go back to it myself every time. Assigning out who builds information for each content area in the knowledge base is particularly helpful. If you have a group of people who are responsible for it, you would map all that out. And like any project management, help a timeline for getting it all done. So typically we treat the creation of a knowledge base as a group project that needs to be done sometime in the vicinity of launch. So that ideally this is ready when you've rolled it out to your users. Training sessions. This is for when your new platforms are more complex and your users may require perhaps a bit more hand-holding, or users who require more hands-on support, right? So maybe people who have very, very low technical capabilities, but you've just rolled out a much more complex system than they're accustomed to working with. And then users with audio-visual or kinetic learning styles, right? People who need to have a conversation with someone or have someone show it to them instead of just reading about how it works. Typically, we almost always do these at least shortly after launch. We don't do a ton of them all the time, but it would be pretty rare for us to recommend a new site launch or an upgrade launch without at least one or two of these happening in the early stages. They're much more engaging, of course, in written documentation. They can be much more helpful. People can ask questions. They can be recorded and reused. You can transcribe them. It can feed into your written documentation. If you have a good, sort of summary and transcription of the work that you're doing there. They're, of course, a lot more time-consuming to produce. You have to come up with a whole presentation. You can do a demo, all that kind of stuff. So it takes more time. It takes more effort. Hard to schedule sometimes, right? If you have a lot of users who are very busy, people might blow off some of your training sessions and have to look at those recordings later after they've, called you a few times to ask how to do the thing. They're obviously they're time limited, they're scope limited. It's hard to scale that out unless you just sort of keep sharing, the recording around with people. Yeah. And the only self-service option is to review the recordings afterwards, right? Otherwise, it's all face-to-face. So we actually have, again, much like the content strategy that we recommend for building a knowledge base, we similarly recommend, doing a training plan when you're sort of identifying documentation and training needs early on in a project, thinking about your audiences, thinking about the different modalities, thinking about the necessary skills, and then developing the content for that process. A couple of things in particular about content creation. Language, clear and concise language is critical. I said this does not mean like dumbing things down for people or like speaking down to them, but as a technical person, your users aren't always going to understand all the language that you're using when you're describing the platform. So clear, concise, straightforward. If you have to use a lot of technical language in order to explain what you're doing, a glossary can be a really helpful thing if you have users who just aren't that deep in the weeds. Visual aids and graphics are always super helpful, like that image I showed of like the annotated component library. Again, even for readers such as myself, breaking up dense text with visuals can just be really helpful in getting people to engage with the material and getting it to kind of sink in. And yeah, content organization is going to be critical, sort of regardless of the different modalities that you choose. So these are sort of the steps that we recommend, or that we do in our own projects when we're putting together a training plan. Like, who needs to learn stuff? What do they need to learn? How do we and they think is the most effective way for them to learn it? And then, okay, we create content for that. So I'm going to speed through this real quick, and then I want to hear if you guys have anything that you want to add here. So again, this is, as I was saying before, explaining complicated things is a complicated task. Explaining them clearly is even more complicated. So it's really, really critical to try and speak the language of your users when you're talking to them. And again, like it's really important to understand that this is not, you're not sort of dumbing things down for people. The idea is you're communicating with them in a way that makes sense to them, and focusing again on sort of what their needs are and what they're trying to accomplish as opposed to what you're trying to accomplish. So this is not just about their level of knowledge, but it's about their priorities. This comes back at the beginning, like, what do they care about? What are they trying to do? And how does your system help them do those things? These are all things that I have heard when trying to do new rollouts like this. I don't understand why we need to deal with this. Wait, are you trying to tell me? No, that's not the thing. That's not at all the thing I was trying to tell them. This isn't how, my such and such a person that I work with says we should do it. They think this is wrong. This one was my favorite. This is from a client project that I did when we were FFW. Explain it to me like I'm an idiot. Never do that. I didn't. Thankfully, I was smart enough not to do that. But again, so people have different levels of engagement with this type of material. Like, we really sort of want to focus on, the way I'm thinking about it is, like, I don't want to, like, when I am trying to explain something complicated to people, I'm not asking them at the end, like, did you understand that? Did it make sense? I'm asking, like, have I given you what you need? So when I think about working with users to help them adopt a system that is pretty complex in nature, I want to know if they're walking away with what they need to be successful with the system. Because that is what will make my system successful. My platform will be successful if they are successful at using it. So I kind of want, I want them to understand, like, why it has value for them. I want to make sure it has additional value for them. I want to make sure I've done the work ahead of time to make their jobs easier and not harder. And I want them to have that understanding of, like, how and why this is going to make their work better. And, as you sort of go through the communication process, it does help to be able to talk to them about, how you've thought through some of the objections or concerns that they've had in the past. You understand the impact it's going to have on them to make these big changes to how they do their work, and what it means for them to be able to accomplish their top priorities. So it really is, like, to the earlier point, Ryan, it's about empathy, right? Understanding what this means for their job, for their day-to-day, for their priorities that they have at the organization, and how ideally this new platform or upgrade is going to help them do that. So with that, we have about 5 minutes left if anybody has questions or wants to share any of their own experiences doing this type of work. Yes?
Yes, I mean, you talk about the users, and there's really two groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's people putting content into the system.
Mm-hmm.
We've made this, and we've got a lot of people that do that. There's a lot of education that goes into content strategy, and, but then you have, it's a website.
Mm-hmm.
So why did you put it there in the first place? Right, and that's for this unknown world of users.
Mm-hmm.
to see.
You're talking about external users.
Yes.
Yeah, so adoption support essentially for rolling out a new site that you want to bring new users to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Like typically when I think about adoption support, I think about the folks who have to manage the site on the back end. When I think about essentially bringing user, I think of UX and user engagement and marketing and communications and those types of things. And I agree, all of that is pretty critical.
Right, but I mean, the users that you're training, I mean, you're talking about, I mean, you can't just put 10 pages of text.
Yeah.
Because that's going to scare the others away.
Yeah, exactly.
And, it's going to look like, academic wall speak,
Mm-hmm.
as you said. So you also have to educate them on marketing value.
Yep.
And how their content that they're adding aligns with the business goals. And I would suspect if it's an academic setting, they've thought very little.
Yeah, you are correct. I mean, the way that they think about goals in higher ed is different. Like we talk about outreach instead of marketing, right? We talk about reach and that kind of thing. But you're right. There are definitely use cases in which external users or customers need training, especially let's say you stand up a new self-service portal.
Yeah.
Right? Like they need the same kind of training that your fellow employees need in order to do that. And I think a lot of these modalities, they certainly need to be adapted for, again, for the interests and priorities of an external user, right? So the priority of an external user is probably, I want to come here and get my task done as quickly and easily as possible. I don't want to have to talk to a human. Unless something goes wrong and then I want to talk to a human real quick. I don't want to talk to a bot. Right? So I think understanding user priorities and again sort of focusing on what do they need to know and when and how do they need to know it, I think applies in equal measure. It's a good point.
Really successful launch I did when we were working in the same company, ICF.
Yeah.
They actually made a video trailer for their new website to sort of get the external users excited about it.
Sizzle reel.
Yeah. And it wasn't like a boring website. It was very flashy and it
half-second frames.
Well, and it's about here's what you can do. Yeah.
It was so weird.
Yeah.
Well, we did the same thing for Philadelphia Orchestra and Kimmel Center when we worked with them, and we did something similar for Certainty, right? So it was the same, like, not just like, here's a new website, but to your point, Ryan, it was like, here's what you can do faster, easier. Here's how this is going to make a difference for you, the customer, right? Like, now you can do this thing online that before you would have had to call a sales rep to do. And that kind of communication, absolutely critical. Do you have any other questions or comments, Ryan? Yeah?
I was just wondering if we could, there's no way to get the slides. This is like really, really helpful.
Oh, I'm so glad. All the slides are going to be available through you, Ryan,
We'll
or
send
through
out,
the
we'll send
summit.
out an email to all the speakers
Okay.
today. And be like, please, if you have this online somewhere, send it. If you just have it as a file, like, technically, I think you could put it into the CMS, but we'll
Find a way. Yes, we can make those available. Yeah. Hi.
I have a question. So you're talking about knowledge base, so it's more like external to for the documentation about how to use the website.
Typically, yeah.
Did you experiment with anything to make that documentation inline? So in the context of the editorial job that you're trying to accomplish, how to present the documentation so it's not some external tool?
Yes, we have done that with a couple projects and clients, and it works. It worked very well. We had one client who needed a real speedy launch, and we didn't have time to write up a whole separate set of documentation. And also, their users were going to be asked to dive into the system right away. And so that's exactly what we did. We built in a much more extensive help text in each of in the component library. And in the editor itself, so that in every case you could get, you sort of pop out additional information about like how to use this component or in what context, or here are steps to like when uploading an image, here are the restrictions and requirements, and here's what you should think about so it like displays and crops correctly and all that fun stuff. So yes, that is also a good way to do it, especially if speed is an issue. Because then you're not having to have people go out elsewhere.
Is it more like adding more descriptions and tooltips, or
Yeah,
I
typically.
don't know, video walkthroughs?
I don't think we did video walkthroughs in that one. I mean, I think we were moving pretty fast. So that was just adding, it was adding further like help text instructions. But that's an interesting thought. This is going to get beyond my technical capacity real quickly to think about like what are the other like modalities you could build in to the back end itself for training and instruction purposes. But it's a good thought. I mean, meeting people exactly where they are can be helpful for sure.
One I did really recently, we just at the top of the content creation page put a link to the design library. So, this was a storybook in this example that was whatever, Figma, something like that. So that you could see like, this is what a finished page looks like when you're done, doing all the things. To kind of like get your brain in the right space to then come back and make edits or, create a new page or whatever, so that you didn't have to just stare at like a white screen.
All right, we're right at 11 o'clock. So thank you everybody for coming. Appreciate it, and I'll be lurking around here today if you have more questions.